Welcome to Dare, the show for startup leaders, innovators, and entrepreneurs who dare to shape the future. Dare is brought to you by the Oregon Entrepreneurs Network, OEN, and Darwaft, the superpower tech team that can make your vision a reality. The Dare Show is excited to welcome Dr. Melissa Bird to the show today. She is a descendant of the Shivwits Band of Paiutes. She's a nationally recognized lay preacher, author, public speaker, podcaster. She holds a PhD in the area of social work. And together with her husband, she's founded a startup farm, the Mermaid's Garden, with a mission of connecting people to land, bodies, and food. So she's hoping that this becomes the premier retreat space and recirculating aquaculture farm in the heart of Oregon. Very exciting vision. Welcome to the show, Dr. Bird.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'd love to hear more about how you came to want to start a startup farm. And what is a startup farm?
Well, this all happened because I've been running my business since 2017 and I do a lot of retreats. And I actually happened to be a participant in a retreat when I started thinking about creating spaces where people connect to their land, their bodies, and their food. And what would happen if we created community around spaces where people understood where their food comes from. And my husband is a disabled veteran, a marine biologist who works in the fisheries. And so he and I started talking about the need for fish because the oceans are being overfished and what it would mean to bring safe and healthy protein like hybrid striped bass to the market. And so we incorporated on January 20th, 2020, which I thought
Congrats.
was a great day to incorporate. And then we started facing the pandemic.
Right.
And it's been a very interesting journey so far. We have tried to get land a couple of times and haven't been successful in that endeavor. And we're hoping this year is the year that we make that happen. And it's been a really interesting process. I think people don't understand how actually difficult and complicating farming is. And they don't understand that land acquisition is also complicated for a lot of people. So it's been a really, really fascinating and interesting journey.
Yeah, well, just to back up a second though, what's a startup farm? Like I know you have these steps, these tactics to get there, but like if somebody handed you the perfect land plot right now and 5 years from now it was all working, what would that look like? What's the vision?
The vision so a startup farm is, well, we're looking for 50 acres because the
Uh-huh.
recirculating aquaculture system takes 25 acres just
Okay.
itself. And the idea of a startup farm is that we're not inheriting land from, we don't come from families of farmers, although my great grandmother did some small scale farming ages ago. She had a little plot of land. But we're not inheriting land. And so a startup farm, it's just like any other startup business. You're starting at the beginning. And one of the things that has been really interesting is that I think a lot of people was actually having this conversation with someone today about farming. I think a lot of people think that people can just go out, buy land, start a farm, make money on that farm. Is a lot more complicated, partly because of there are hosts of unknowns that come with farming. You deal with weather, you deal with soil, you deal with water, you deal with all of these other things that come with land and growing food. That's one of the reasons we are so invested in making a recirculating aquaculture farm work is because recirculating aquaculture uses 95% less water. It's better for the environment. And you can take that water, which is full of really amazing nutrients from the fish, and create fertilizer out of it. So you create an actual secondary market where you can use that water for other foods on a farm. And so we've learned so much over this process. But I think if I was going to define a startup farm, it would be, people coming in to engage in farming without having had a family history in farming. Or, my husband grew up in the city in Orange County. So he didn't
Yeah.
have trees.
Yeah, well, so basically, it's a way of having people be able to get going in agriculture and be able to explore their dreams in that area without having to acquire the 50 acres because you would have already done a lot of the work there, right?
Yeah, I think, we've been doing a lot of thinking about owning land and also, someone people have said, well, why don't you just lease a piece of property? And one of the things that's different about engaging in aquaculture is that you're putting a structure on a piece of land and
Mhm.
your improvements to that land. And so in the world of business that we run in, having the land, having the company own the land makes a lot more sense when you're putting that much infrastructure on. We're not going out and putting out 20 acres of hazelnuts or whatever. You can lease land to do all sorts of
Yeah.
crops. But in this instance, we have really, in everyone we've consulted with and working with it, it makes more sense for us to be able to acquire land and purchase land because of the infrastructure that we're putting on the property.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So I know that you and I met down in Corvallis. And so we were at a startup event down there. I'm curious if you could tell me a little bit about what the startup world has been like down in that part of Oregon and what the startup ecosystem is like.
Well, it's an interesting ecosystem. One of the things that we have run into is that people have a difficult time understanding how agriculture works. And even I thought, this is a great idea. We got the business plan. We worked with the Small Business Development Center early on. We did our financials. Our business partners actually have a business background. I've been running my business for a long time. And I thought that what would happen is that we'd be able to tap into maybe some veterans in agriculture grants, that we would be able to tap into investors who are talking about sustainable and regenerative work because of what's happening with climate change. I had this idea that people would understand this. And
Mm,
I have quickly come to realize that people understand technology. People understand wine.
yeah. Yeah.
People don't understand aquaculture. And, I even a couple of bankers way early on in this process were like, well, I could give you money for cows or pigs, but I don't understand this fish thing. So I'm going to say no. And,
Yeah.
and so what we're realizing is the ecosystem of lending, the ecosystem of investing, the typical traditional, startup avenues are not really open for people who want to be growing a crop that people don't understand.
So if I can pause you there for a second, could you educate us a bit? Tell us more about aquaculture.
Sure. So there's a lot of different types of aquaculture. There are, for example, a lot of our aquaculture farms on the coast are these huge farms where the fish are kept in nets, basically. It's a kind of nasty and dirty sort of a process. We're very picky about the fish we eat now because we've learned so much about farming fish. But recirculating aquaculture takes place in like a giant pole barn, basically, a big building, and there's these huge tanks. I mean, we're talking about growing 2,000 pounds of hybrid striped bass a week. So you just
Wow, that's a lot of fish.
a lot of fish, right?
Yeah.
And so there are these huge tanks and they run on this big recirculating system. And they happen in a lot of other parts of the country and all over the world. Recirculating aquaculture, particularly for tilapia, is really, really a lot of people are doing recirculating aquaculture because of it using less water. So you've got these open net farms on the coast, which is mainly saltwater fish. And then you've got these recirculating aquaculture systems where the fish are in these huge tanks and then they're harvested from the tanks.
Right.
And then you have a fish that uses less hormones, less, there's no mercury involved, less antibiotics. The fish, you get to choose what kind of fish food you use. And
Hmm.
what we would be doing is growing a healthier protein that's good for our bodies and good for the earth. And I've learned a lot about aquaculture. And of course, my husband's the expert in the field. So I don't have to know too much, just enough. But really, it's this way of growing fish indoors and then being able to use the fish fertilizer from the water to be able to grow crops, traditional crops with like, fruits and vegetables and those things.
Right. Right. Got it. Okay. Sorry for
No,
the
it's good. I love
sidebar
talking
there.
about it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So, how did you personally come into aquaculture as being an interest of yours?
Well, I came into it because of my husband. So my
Ah,
husband, while he was getting his degree at Oregon State University in marine biology, one of the things that he studied was aquaculture, particularly because his main mission, especially after he came home from Iraq. So he's always grew up in Orange County, California. So he's a surfer and he used to be a spear fisherman. And
Yeah.
He just recognized through his education and through all the research he did at OSU that our oceans are being overfished. And eventually, we're not going to have fish coming from the ocean if we continue along this route. And so, Jim really, when I said to him, if you could grow anything, what would you grow? And he said, fish.
Hmm.
Originally, we started creating, like, imagining what it would be like to do saltwater fish inland. Like, is there a technology where we could grow saltwater fish inland? And we actually connected with another aquaculture person who actually grew shrimp in Portland, like
Really
inland, yeah, saltwater shrimp inland.
interesting.
And
Yeah.
we talked with her a lot about her business and how that ran and what were the pitfalls, and she really helped inform our business plan as we thought about moving forward. And so for me, because I'm the one who does retreats, and especially because of the way that I engage in my own business, one of the things I've really noticed is when you are doing retreats with people, the food you provide to people really matters. And
Hmm.
creating ecosystem within that retreat space where people are able to nourish their bodies, it also nourishes their souls and it reconnects them back to the land where they're at. And so for me, what's really important is being able to not just feed the people that I'm serving, but also feed our communities and think about how are we helping the Pacific Northwest and people in the Pacific Northwest have access to safe and healthy food.
Yeah, fantastic. Got it. So we had talked earlier about the startup ecosystem, and I'll just ask you a more personal question. I actually know a number of native entrepreneurs, and there seems to be a really entrepreneurial culture in the native world, in the indigenous culture that I know of. I'm not part of that culture. So could you tell us a little bit about why I keep meeting so many Indian entrepreneurs?
I'm really glad you asked that question because one of the very first things that happened when we started this is I connected with the Northwest Native Chamber of Commerce. And I didn't even know we had a Native Chamber of Commerce I started my business in 2017. So it wasn't until 2020 that I discovered Northwest Native Chamber. And becoming a part of that group of entrepreneurs has been really helpful because there are still a lot of cultural barriers to Native and Indigenous people building capital, and
Right.
that because of the long history of keeping Native Indigenous people off their land. And
Mhm.
so one of the things that has been really beautiful is you're absolutely right. There are so many Indigenous folks who are running really incredible businesses. We had the honor of going to a dinner that Javelina from Portland was putting on, and Javelina is owned by an Indigenous woman and she cooks using first food. So it was just this really amazing, oh my God, the dinner was so good. We had rabbit tacos and, just this beautiful dandelion salad and this beautiful food with beans and meat and vegetables that she was trained as a French chef. And so and they have a restaurant in Portland now. So shout out to Javelina because it is amazing.
Fantastic. Yeah.
But connecting with other Indigenous people who understand this real deep sense of community because
Mhm.
we are community people, and when we bring people back together in community, that's what really anchors us to the land. And it's just a really beautiful way of thinking about how we are all connected and how many I am not alone in this entrepreneurial space when it comes to my native and indigenous brothers and sisters. So it's really amazing.
Right. Fantastic. So you've gone through the process like of starting this up. You started in 2020, as you said, a time that was challenging. It turns out we didn't know that at the time. And then you have worked on getting land at different points in time. What are your next three big steps?
Well, the first thing that we're doing is we've actually gone back to our Department of Economic Development here locally in Benton County and started talking about not just the barriers that we've experienced, but also the realities of getting funding for projects when you own a small business. And especially with the recent cuts to the USDA, we're definitely going to be experiencing some issues with funding. And
Yeah.
so our first step has been to go to think about meeting with different people who can help us understand where the money is now and help us understand where land is now and see if we can't work together to figure out how to collect around telling this story now that it's 5 years old and seeing how we can. So I've been really, that's my first step is telling this story again to new people and reconnecting with new people. The second thing that we've been doing is updating our financials because, of course, we've updated them now. This is our third time. We've adjusted them now for inflation and really getting clear on what it is that we want from the people that we're connecting with. So we have updated our business plans and our financials. We've been actually working with a business accelerator from NAIA, the Native American Youth Alliance has a really incredible business accelerator. So again, we've gone back to connecting with our native and indigenous folks to see what opportunities could be available. And then the third thing I'm really looking at is I want money. I mean, very candidly, I'm looking for, either an investor or someone who has connections to helping us bring together the funding that we need to make this happen because we're going to have to prioritize regionalizing our food and
Mm.
that actually was something that became very apparent during the pandemic that regionalizing our food is going to be better for everybody locally. And if we can figure out a way to regionalize our food, it's going to help in the long run as we're moving forward with all the changes that are taking place in our food systems.
So regionalizing food, what do you mean by that? Do you mean relying on food that is only grown regionally rather than shipping it in from Chile or something?
Yeah, it's about changing the way we think about how we get our groceries, how we get our food. One of the things that happened during the pandemic, of course, is that trucks weren't traveling the way they were. And so, I mean, it was kind of like that weird toilet paper thing, right?
Yeah.
Where you're going to get toilet paper. And there was a movement that really blossomed from the beginning of the pandemic where a lot of farmers started talking about, okay, how can we make sure that the people in our communities around us close together if we're not going to have these big semi trucks coming in and bringing food in from other countries and other parts of the country or our country, how can we regionalize our food so that food costs for families become lower in the long run? And when we regionalize our food and think about even just the Pacific Northwest, if we thought about Washington down to California, how much less expensive would it be for families to eat if we were making sure that families in this region were getting the food that we're growing here every single day?
Right, right. It would make a big difference. Absolutely. Okay. So you have a big vision for the future. You've gone through some hurdles, some pain points, and you're still seeing this as possible in the future.
Yeah, we are. We're reimagining what it could look like next. So we are open to the idea of maybe we do a demonstration project with the fish and
Mhm.
just do that, on some sort of industrial land or something so that we can prove that this works. It's been really I think it's especially been frustrating for my husband, but it's proven time and again that recirculating aquaculture works. I mean, it's been happening all over the world for decades. uh,
Yeah,
but doing it here has been a bit of a battle, and at first I thought it was gonna be a battle because of the historic runs on salmon and the just the complicated story we have around fish in the state of Oregon, in particular, Oregon,
yeah.
Washington. But what I've really begun to notice is that there's this interesting block people have with figuring out how to bring these 2 businesses together and about how they can work in concert with each other and
Mm.
actually how they can provide a reciprocal relationship with each other. And that's just hard for people to comprehend and understand. And so, my hope is that as we're moving forward, people begin to see the need for this reciprocal relationship between a farming operation and providing space where people can come and reconnect to themselves.
Great. I think that's a fantastic way to end this episode. Our last question is always, what do you dare to dream? You've kind of laid out one dream, but what do you dare to dream, Dr. Bird?
You know, I think my biggest dream in all of this is that we can start seeing each other in our collective humanity. My dream is that we can start to understand that when we have big visions or big ideas, we call that innovation, and that innovation looks different for different people. And if we could really see each other in our shared humanity, I dream of us being able to have conversations that aren't polarizing and aggravating to the nervous system, but to really create opportunities for all of us to come together at the table and have real, authentic conversations.
Thank you for sharing that. Really appreciate it. And thank you for your big vision. I wish you all the best of luck with your desire to build the Mermaid's Garden, and I hope that all works out.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy you came to me to have me on the podcast. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to our guests today for their insights into the entrepreneurial ecosystem. We wish you all the best in your startup journey. The Dare Show is brought to you by the Oregon Entrepreneurs Network and by Darwaf, the superpower tech team that can make your vision a reality. Visit us at oen.org or at darwaf.io. Thanks again for listening. Till next time.